Star Wars didn't just change cinema, it cracked something open. Suddenly, every studio wanted heroes from nowhere, glowing weapons, evil empires, and galaxies that felt ancient and new at the same time. What followed wasn't just imitation, it was obsession. And hidden inside those so-called rip-offs are films that dared to twist the formula into something strange, risky, and quietly brilliant. Number 12. Guardians of the Galaxy, 2014. By the time Guardians of the Galaxy arrived, Star Wars had already become sacred text, untouchable, mythologized. And Marvel's cosmic gamble looked on paper like sacrilege. A ragtag crew of smugglers, a mystical energy source, a galaxy ruled by tyrants, a wisecracking hero with a tragic past. The DNA was unmistakable, but where Star Wars reached for timeless myth, Guardians reached inward, toward loneliness and emotional damage. What makes Guardians secretly brilliant isn't the humor, it's the vulnerability. Peter Quill isn't a chosen one guided by destiny. He's a child who never processed loss. His rebellion isn't noble, it's defensive. Every joke is armor. Every dance move is a refusal to feel. The film uses Star Wars structure as a Trojan horse, smuggling in a story about people who don't believe they deserve connection, let alone heroism. Visually, the film embraces cosmic excess the way Star Wars once did. Alien prisons, derelict ships, celestial battlegrounds. But tonally, it flips the power fantasy. Victory doesn't come from mastery or lineage. It comes from people literally holding hands, choosing unity despite pain. That's not accidental. It's a rebuttal to the myth of the solitary savior. In the end, Guardians of the Galaxy doesn't just borrow Star Wars. It interrogates it. It asks what happens when destiny is replaced by choice, when family is found instead of inherited, and when saving the galaxy is less important than saving each other. That's not a ripoff. That's evolution. Number 11. Dune, 1984. If Star Wars is myth made simple, Dune is myth made hostile. David Lynch's adaptation arrived looking like a space epic, but behaving like a philosophical assault. Yes, the surface similarities are obvious. Desert planets, mystical powers, a young man destined to reshape the universe. But where Star Wars invites the audience in, Dune dares them to keep up. This film refuses comfort. Its universe is dense, oppressive, and ritualistic. Power isn't something you grow into. It crushes you. Paul Atreides isn't a farm boy discovering greatness. He's a weapon being sharpened by prophecy, politics, and religious manipulation. The film understands something most space operas avoid. Messiahs are terrifying. Lynch's direction strips away the fantasy sheen. Inner monologues echo like intrusive thoughts. Technology feels grotesque and invasive. The Bene Gesserit aren't mystical mentors. They're ideological engineers. Even the Force-like abilities feel violating, not empowering. Control comes at the cost of identity. Dune failed on release because it demanded too much. It asked audiences to abandon the comfort Star Wars had trained them to expect. But that's exactly why it endures. It's a film about how myths are constructed, abused, and weaponized. About how revolutions don't end in freedom, but in new hierarchies. In hindsight, Dune isn't a Star Wars imitation at all. It's a warning, a reminder that behind every heroic legend is a system that benefits from belief. And that kind of ambition, even when flawed, is the mark of a masterpiece hiding in plain sight. Number 10. Enemy Mine, 1985. Enemy Mine begins like 100 Star Wars knockoffs before it. 2 enemy pilots, a vast galaxy locked in endless war, dogfights, military rhetoric, dehumanization. But then the film makes a radical decision. It strips everything away. No fleets, no empires, no glory. Just 2 enemies marooned on a hostile planet with no one left to hate but each other. What follows is one of the most quietly devastating science fiction stories of the decade. The human pilot and his alien adversary are forced into intimacy by survival. Language becomes the first bridge, then culture, then grief. The film dismantles the fantasy of righteous conflict piece by piece, replacing it with a slow realization that war depends on distance to survive. Unlike Star Wars, there is no cosmic evil here, no faceless empire, just systems that profit from division and soldiers taught not to question it. The alien isn't monstrous. He's vulnerable, spiritual, and deeply communal. And when he dies, the loss feels personal in a way most space operas never achieve. Enemy Mine uses the shell of Star Wars to tell an anti-Star Wars story, one where victory isn't destruction, but understanding, where legacy isn't bloodline or rebellion, but the choice to raise someone else's child. It's science fiction at its most humane, a reminder that the most radical thing a genre film can do is slow down and let empathy win. And then number 9, The Adventures of Buckaroo. Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, 1984. Buckaroo Banzai arrived at the exact moment Hollywood was trying to reverse engineer Star Wars. Studios believed the secret ingredient was space, quips, and a heroic figure audiences could latch onto. Buckaroo Banzai takes that assumption and detonates it. This film doesn't simplify myth, it overloads it. Rockstar surgeon physicist action hero, interdimensional aliens, parallel realities, lore delivered without explanation. It dares the audience to keep up or get lost. On the surface, it looks like a Star Wars descendant, a charismatic hero, loyal allies, alien antagonists, world-ending stakes. But structurally, it refuses the comfort of the hero's journey. There is no origin story, no audience hand-holding. As if Buckaroo already exists as a legend. You are dropped into the middle of his mythology and expected to accept it as reality. That's not laziness, it's defiance. Where Star Wars builds myth by making it accessible, Buckaroo Banzai builds cult devotion by making it exclusive. The film treats its universe as fully formed, unconcerned with whether viewers understand every reference. That confidence is intoxicating. It creates the feeling that you've stumbled into something larger than the movie itself, a world that existed long before you arrived and will continue after the credits roll. The villains are absurd, yet threatening. The tone oscillates between deadpan humor and genuine tension, and beneath the chaos lies a quiet sincerity. Buckaroo isn't motivated by destiny or prophecy. He acts because responsibility demands it, because intelligence without compassion is dangerous. Buckaroo Banzai didn't fail because it was weird. It failed because it refused to compromise. In hindsight, it feels less like a Star Wars imitation and more like a rebellion against the idea that space fantasy needs to explain itself to be meaningful. That audacity is why it became immortal. Number 8. Ice Pirates, 1984. Ice Pirates looks like a joke. Space rogues, evil empires, sword fights in zero gravity, a galaxy where water is currency. On paper, it reads like a cheap Star Wars parody rushed into production. But that surface chaos hides something sharper. This film understands the genre well enough to dissect it while still loving it. At its core, Ice Pirates is about decay. Empires don't fall because of rebels. They rot from the inside. The film takes Star Wars iconography and subjects it to entropy. The technology is unreliable. The heroes are selfish. Time dilation ages characters mid-adventure. Even victory feels compromised. Nothing is clean. Nothing is sacred. What makes Ice Pirates quietly brilliant is its refusal to glorify adventure. Every space battle has consequences. Every escape costs something. The heroes aren't chosen ones. They're survivors navigating a system designed to exploit. The humor isn't there to soften the story. It's there to expose absurdity, to remind you how ridiculous unchecked power becomes when it's normalized. The infamous time warp sequence, where characters age decades in seconds, is more than a gag. It's a metaphor for how systems steal lives without anyone noticing. Youth, potential, futures, gone in an instant. Star Wars never lingered on that. Ice Pirates forces you to sit with it. This is a film that mocks the fantasy of eternal heroism while still indulging in swashbuckling spectacle. It laughs at space opera even as it stages one, and that duality is rare. Ice Pirates isn't just a ripoff. It's a satire born from understanding, a film made by people who love the genre enough to criticize it from the inside. Number 7. The Black Hole, 1979. The black hole is what happens when a studio built on optimism stares into the void. Disney watched Star Wars rewrite the rules and decided to follow. But instead of rebels and hope, they delivered something colder, something unsettling. A space epic obsessed not with victory, but with obsession. The familiar elements are there. A mysterious ship, a larger-than-life antagonist, robots that echo beloved droids, vast cosmic imagery. But the tone is radically different. There is no clear good and evil, no triumphant rebellion, just characters drawn inexorably toward destruction by curiosity and pride. The villain isn't a tyrant ruling an empire. He's a man who refused to accept limits, a scientist who sacrificed morality for achievement. The film's central threat isn't an army, it's isolation, the slow erosion of empathy in pursuit of greatness. The black hole asks a question Star Wars never did. What happens when intelligence is divorced from conscience? Visually, the film is stunning. Models glide through space with eerie grace. The robots are expressive, yet unsettling. Even the color palette feels funereal. This isn't a universe meant to inspire wonder. It's meant to warn. The ending shocked audiences. No victory parade, no clear resolution, just imagery that borders on the metaphysical. Heaven, hell, oblivion. The film refuses to explain itself, leaving viewers unsettled long after it ends. The black hole was rejected because it betrayed expectations. But that betrayal is its legacy. It used the space opera template not to entertain comfortingly, but to explore obsession, isolation, and the cost of unchecked ambition. In hindsight, it's one of the boldest responses to Star Wars ever put on screen. Number 6. Spaceballs, 1987. Spaceballs is often dismissed as a gag reel stretched to feature length. That's a mistake. Yes, it's a parody. Yes, it's loud and ridiculous. But underneath the jokes is one of the sharpest dissections of Star Wars ever put on film. Mel Brooks didn't just mock the franchise. He exposed its mechanics. Every familiar element is here. The masked villain, the naive hero, the mystical power, the merchandising machine. Spaceballs understands Star Wars so completely that it can dismantle it in real time. Characters comment on their own narrative structure. The film acknowledges sequels before they exist. The myth collapses under the weight of self-awareness. What makes Spaceballs secretly brilliant is that it arrives from a place of affection. Brooks doesn't attack Star Wars because he hates it. He attacks it because he sees how myth becomes product, how rebellion becomes branding, how sincerity turns into self-importance once money enters the equation. Dark Helmet isn't terrifying because he's evil. He's terrifying because he's petty. His power is meaningless. His authority is hollow. He's not the dark side of destiny. He's middle management with a god complex. That's devastating satire. Even the Force parody cuts deeper than it seems. The joke isn't that mystical powers are silly. It's that audiences are trained to accept vague spiritual systems without question, as long as they feel epic. Spaceballs pulls that rug out deliberately. By the end, the film doesn't just parody Star Wars. It inoculates the audience against blind reverence. It teaches viewers how to see the machinery behind the magic. That's why it has endured. Spaceballs didn't age poorly. It aged dangerously well, especially in a world where franchises never end and nostalgia is endlessly monetized. Number 5. Star Crash, 1978. Star Crash exists because Star Wars exploded faster than studios could react. Yet this Italian production barely hides its intentions. Laser swords, galactic emperors, space princesses, epic narration. Everything is louder, cheaper, and more unrestrained. But that excess is exactly why the film matters. Where Hollywood chased Polish, Star Crash chased imagination. The film feels unfiltered, untamed. It stacks ideas recklessly, unconcerned with coherence as long as spectacle survives. Giant robots, ancient prophecies, telepathic powers, cosmic duels. It's a child's understanding of space fantasy brought to life without restraint. That rawness gives the film a dreamlike quality. Logic collapses, tone shifts violently, but emotion remains sincere. Star Crash isn't cynical. It believes in its own nonsense with absolute conviction, and that belief carries it further than it has any right to go. This is myth-making without refinement. Heroes are heroic because the story says so. Villains are evil because power demands opposition. There is no irony here, no commentary, just unashamed fantasy. In a strange way, it feels closer to ancient storytelling than most polished blockbusters ever do. The special effects are crude but ambitious. Models collide in space like toys in motion. Colors burn. Music swells beyond necessity. It's cinema driven by impulse rather than control. Star Crash failed because it arrived too early and too honestly. But as time passes, its sincerity becomes its strength. It reminds us that genres aren't born from perfection. They're born from obsession, from creators chasing wonder without permission. In that sense, Star Crash isn't a knockoff, it's a fossil. Or a snapshot of the moment space fantasy became contagious. Number 4. Krull, 1983. Krull looks like a Star Wars imitation wearing medieval armor, a chosen hero. a dark fortress that moves, a mystical weapon, a princess kidnapped by inhuman evil. The structure is familiar, but Krull refuses to stay in one genre long enough to be predictable. This film is space opera disguised as fantasy, or fantasy invaded by science fiction. Lasers become magic, aliens become demons, technology becomes myth. Krull collapses the boundary between genres, creating a universe where logic matters less than atmosphere. The weapon at its center isn't a glowing sword, it's the glaive, ancient, violent, uncontrollable. Power in Krull is dangerous. It doesn't elevate the hero, it threatens to consume him. That alone sets it apart from Star Wars mythology, where mastery leads to balance. Krull is obsessed with sacrifice. Companions die without ceremony. Love doesn't guarantee survival. Destiny demands payment. The film understands that fairy tales were never meant to be safe. They were warnings wrapped in wonder. Visually, Krull is striking. Vast landscapes, burning fortresses, otherworldly creatures. The imagery lingers because it feels earnest. The film isn't trying to be ironic or clever. It wants to overwhelm. Krull was labeled confused on release. Too fantasy for sci-fi. Too sci-fi for fantasy. But that confusion is its identity. It represents a moment when filmmakers were still experimenting with what Star Wars made possible, before rules hardened, before genres were fenced off. Krull doesn't belong anywhere. Yet, and that's why it still matters. Number 3. Flash Gordon, 1980. Flash Gordon is the most honest Star Wars ripoff on this list because it refuses to pretend otherwise. Where other films tried to disguise their borrowing, Flash Gordon leaned into spectacle so hard it circled back into purity. This isn't subtle science fiction, it's space opera as mythic pageantry. Loud, sexual, operatic, unapologetic. Yes, Star Wars borrowed from old Flash Gordon serials, but this version borrows Star Wars scale, confidence, and production muscle, then dials everything past excess into delirium. The result is a film that feels less like narrative cinema and more like a living comic. Characters don't evolve. They declare, they pose, they burn with archetypal intensity. What makes Flash Gordon secretly brilliant is its understanding of tone. It knows realism would kill it, so it rejects realism entirely, sets glow like neon dreams. Costumes defy physics. Dialogue borders on absurd. And yet it works because it commits fully. There is no embarrassment here. Only conviction. The villain isn't complex. He's tyranny incarnate. The hero isn't conflicted. He's courage in motion. In an era where Star Wars was already becoming more serious, Flash Gordon reminds us that myth doesn't require restraint. It requires belief. The Queen soundtrack doesn't underscore the film. It detonates it. Music becomes propulsion. Emotion becomes volume. Every scene feels like a declaration that cinema can still be loud and ridiculous and sincere all at once. Flash Gordon failed with critics because irony had already started creeping in, but time has been kind to it. In hindsight, it stands as a reminder that genre doesn't need to mature to be meaningful. Sometimes the bravest thing a film can do is shout instead of whisper. Number 2. The Last Starfighter, 1984. The Last Starfighter looks like a Star Wars fantasy filtered through suburbia, a lonely teenager, a nowhere town, a dream of escape. Replace moisture farming with an arcade cabinet and the blueprint is obvious. But this film does something quietly radical. It makes the fantasy explicit. In Star Wars, destiny finds Luke. In The Last Starfighter, destiny recruits Alex through a game. Not lineage, not prophecy. Skill, obsession, practice. This is heroism earned, not inherited, and that distinction matters. The film understands the power of escapism because it understands its cost. Alex doesn't want adventure for glory, he wants out of stagnation, out of obligation, out of a future already closing in. When the stars call, it's not romantic, it's terrifying. Visually, the film was ahead of its time. Early CG, I gave space combat a strange, artificial beauty. Not realistic, but dreamlike. Perfect for a story about simulated heroism becoming real. What elevates The Last Starfighter is its empathy. The film doesn't mock small lives, it honors them. It understands that wanting more doesn't mean rejecting where you come from. And when Alex chooses to return, to bring his world with him instead of abandoning it, the story transcends its premise. This isn't a power fantasy. It's a negotiation between ambition and responsibility, between escape and loyalty. Star Wars told audiences they could be special. The Last Starfighter asked what happens after you believe it. That question still resonates. Number 1. Battle Beyond the Stars, 1980. Battle. Beyond the Stars is the purest expression of Star Wars contagion. Roger Corman saw the phenomenon and responded immediately. Cheap, fast, efficient. On the surface, it's shameless. A peaceful farming world. A ruthless warlord. A desperate recruitment of warriors. It's 7 samurai wearing Star Wars clothing without apology. But beneath the imitation lies something remarkable. This film understands scale not through money, but through intent. Every ship feels designed. Every alien feels purposeful. James Horner's score doesn't compensate for budget. It elevates emotion. It gives the story weight it has no business possessing. What makes Battle Beyond the Stars secretly brilliant is its focus on community. This isn't a chosen one story. It's a collective survival story. Victory doesn't come from mastery of mystical power. It comes from cooperation, from sacrifice, from people choosing to fight for a place that welcomed them. The hero isn't destined. He volunteers, and that matters. The film strips Star Wars mythology down to its moral core and rebuilds it with humility. Courage isn't inherited, it's offered. Even the infamous ship designs, ridiculed for decades, now feel emblematic of a different era of creativity, when imagination wasn't restrained by franchise consistency, when ideas could be strange, risky, even embarrassing. Battle Beyond the Stars didn't pretend to be revolutionary. It just wanted to tell a story that mattered using tools it barely had. And sometimes, that honesty outlives spectacle. That's why it earns the top spot, not because it hides its inspiration, but because it transforms imitation into conviction. Star Wars didn't just inspire copycats. It unlocked possibility. These films weren't crimes against originality. They were experiments, some reckless, some sincere, all searching for meaning in the shadow of a giant. And sometimes, that shadow is where the most interesting stories grow.